Welcome to Breaking History. My name is Sean Morgan. I'm the host of the Sean Morgan Report on AMP News. I'm here with Matthew Arrett from the Rising Tide Foundation. And Matt, the big news, I think in the whole history of humanity, this meeting in South Africa of the BRICS nations is a turning point. I think we're going to look back at these decisions that will be made at this time period of before BRICS really went full cooperation and after BRICS went full cooperation. What are some of the highlights from the meetings thus far?
Absolutely. No, I agree. We are living through historic times. And I think it's one of those things that you tend to appreciate more in hindsight. And while you're living through it, it's a bit more difficult for some to sort of appreciate what's really happening. And to keep in mind the context in which the BRICS Summit in South Africa, it's the 15th annual summit that has occurred, is occurring at a time where we are having a major breakdown. I mean, everybody watching this is probably aware to varying degrees that the Western, what's called the unipolar system centered in London and Wall Street as a central axis of global monetary control, which has been dominant for centuries, is collapsing. It's becoming revealed that, or at least recognized finally, that what we thought was an economy is a giant bubble with fictitious capital like derivatives, impossible to pay debts, and no real economy, or at least a highly atrophied, sabotaged, once powerful but now very weak and destroyed real economy that people were required to support their lives, their children, their families, and their nation. I'm talking here about the factories, the agricultural and industrial powers that we once enjoyed as the greatest country in the world. The United States here, and also Canada was participating in this in the 50s and in the 60s. That is completely atrophied. So now the BRICS nations have met together. That means Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, but with 60 other observer nations who participated, 30 of them from Africa itself at this summit. It's still underway. Putin was not able to show up due to the weaponization of the legal system, both in various nations. It's not just in the United States, although it is in the United States, as people know from the attacks on Trump, but also in Pakistan, where Imran Khan, who was a major fighter against the sanction policy against Russia in Pakistan, but also a major champion for Pakistan-Chinese co-development around the Belt and Road Initiative extensions into Pakistan. He's been taken down in made-up legal charges and is now facing 3 years in prison and disqualifying him from running in the upcoming elections in November in Pakistan. Meanwhile, the current Pakistani government has just signed a military contract with the U.S. military-industrial complex to do joint maneuvers, joint training, joint basing, and also interoperability.
There's the evidence that it was a coup right there. I just want to highlight this because this is a really important point, that the head of state of Russia can't even go to the BRICS summit because the International Criminal Court, which is just a kangaroo court, has made it so that South Africa would be obligated to arrest Putin if he showed up. So that's ridiculous.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And honestly, he probably could have gone, but being South Africa being what it is, it's not the most secure region in the world. There's still all sorts of networks of deep state operatives, with the Cecil Rhodes network still active. So I think that Putin did the right thing by choosing to make things easy on his counterparts in South Africa to not have to deal with the scandal, and also to keep his own security intact. It was probably the right thing to do. And I listened to his speech, and it was a very powerful speech. But you have a long waiting list. I mean, as it stands, the nations right now coalescing around the BRICS, which include over 40 nations who have expressed openly their intention to join what's called the BRICS Plus. Many of them are from Africa. Many of them are from Latin America. Many of them are from Asia more broadly. Have looked towards things like the new BRICS Development Bank, the New Development Bank that was created in 2015. This played a very prominent role in this current summit that's underway, where up until now, the bank itself has been forced to settle transactions in US dollars, even though the BRICS nations only use the US dollar for something like 30% of their transactions or less. But the BRICS Development Bank, which could be and should be an alternative, a way to break free of the IMF and World Bank and US aid type of systems of control, it has been withheld, constrained by the use of the US dollar, which obviously by everybody who in the world has to settle their transactions and with other nations in US dollars. This gives the imperialists who are controlling the United States, a major weapon to sanction countries, as they've done to over 30 countries today, which are on the U.S. sanctions list, which can do more murder, more death than launching bombs onto a country, because you're now withholding the ability of the nation's people, of their children, from accessing food, from accessing very basic things that they need to survive. So this is one of the destructive elements of sanctioning. So the BRICS now are setting in play measures to get around that. And Dilma Rousseff, who's the former head of Brazil, now she's in charge of the BRICS Development Bank, has also made the point that they will increase the lending up to $10 billion this year. And this will increase. But she made the point that this is not going to be seen as so much of an alternative to the US dollar as a new system completely with no conditionalities. And that's the key thing is that it's the system of how we're thinking about political economy, which is rotten to the core. And when you look at the idea of conditionalities, that's one of the key ways that poor nations were kept under the heel and having no development despite receiving untold hundreds of billions of dollars since World War II. How could we give Africa so much money since World War II or many other poor countries, but have seen only an increase in starvation, instability, war? How is that possible? Well, it's through these conditionalities that the IMF and World Bank, under the control of the Rhodes Scholars, the Fabians, these death cultists, since the moment Franklin Roosevelt died, have said, okay, if you want the loan, we'll give it to you, but under the condition that you restructure your government, that you bring in Western corporations that have sole monopoly rights over your minerals, over your land, over whatever oil is under your territory, and we will enrich a small elite within, Lesotho or Nigeria or whatever, but they will then be beholden to their puppet masters in the West. And that's how these conditionalities work, and the people never benefit. Whereas now you have a different style of lending, and the BRICS Development Bank, Dilma Rousseff made the point that just looking at what they're going to invest in, they have water projects, hydroelectricity, dams, rail. These are real things in the real world that have won over the confidence of many of the African nations who have suffered so much and are now looking at this as a real alternative, including South American countries too, that have been suffering no shortage of abuse over decades.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if anyone's not read the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that tells part of the story about selling this pie in the sky, projections to some kind of corrupt government, and then they take on a loan, and it's this classic predatory lending at a grand scale of billions of dollars, and then it's money laundering because a lot of the money doesn't go to the projects they should, and it doesn't benefit the people. So if there's a real alternative and it really works the way you're saying it'll work, and these big infrastructure projects happen and it increases the real economy and real productivity, and it really helps the people, I mean, this is going to be so great for humanity. And it's not just little tiny African nations that are joining BRICS Plus. It's Mexico, it's Venezuela, it's Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are just gigantic economies with tons of resources that makes it truly a competitor with the US-based world economy, right? I mean, if you put the number of people, the population, the productivity, the number of resources, and you put it on a scale, the BRICS side is looking bigger than the other side in some ways, right?
Oh, yeah, by far. Yeah. And in terms of any real value standard that you want to use, that's not simply GDP manipulation, although you could use that if you want. The BRICS nations alone, just the basic five, represent over 40% of the world population. We're dealing with India. We're dealing with China. We're dealing with Brazil. I mean, these are big, like the population levels are immense. But then also you have the GDP. Just last year, those five nations alone, their GDP outpaced for the first time the G7, the so-called most glorious advanced countries of the world. They actually outpaced that. And then when you start looking at some of the individual variables, like the Chinese life expectancy, which was formerly, back in 1965, it was something like 46 years of age on average, and individual access to energy, which back then was like a fraction of what the average US citizen was able to enjoy. today, the average life expectancy of a person living in China has reached 78.3 years of age, whereas in the United States, it's collapsed down to 76.8 years. Just over the last 2 years alone, that collapse was drastic, and we all know why. Also, access to energy. The West has been shutting down its hydroelectric dams. Over 1,000 have been demolished in the past 30 years alone in the United States, whereas India, China, Russia, other nations that are not committed to murdering their people have only seen a massive increase of hydropower, nuclear power, investments into fusion, as well as natural gas, coal, other things that are just vital. And they're offering this. This is the key thing, too. They're offering this to the poor countries that have suffered under neocolonialism. So when you see the African leaders in Niger, which has such an abundance of uranium under their soil, or Burkina Faso, which has so much coal, they haven't been allowed to develop it. Only 3% of the people living in Niger actually have access to electricity. That's 3%. The infant mortality is huge. The average life expectancy is terrible. And yet they have so much wealth and abundance. Same thing for Sudan. So when you see Russia or China, especially China or India, coming in to Africa and doing a business deal, it's actually based upon helping them develop the resources under their land for the use of the people, as well as benefiting in an honest business arrangement. It was the way we used to do things. So it's a very different way of looking at it. And I think that when you look at the 6 coups d'etats that have happened across West Africa in recent years, I mean, the most recent being Niger, in the past, since the 90s, you had the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which are basically puppet regimes who have been used as an instrument to invade those other countries that resisted the IMF or World Bank. They've done well over 6 or 7 military interventions. Today, even though the threat was there to launch an invasion with the support of the US and France against Niger to put the puppet regime back in power, they've failed to convey their meetings, because each of those governments have militaries which basically told them, if you do that, we're going to overthrow you too, and you're going to have your own coup d'etat, which has kept a lot of the what normally would have worked in days of Anglo-American hegemony of the past are no longer working. The formula is breaking down because there is a new game in town, and the game operates with different rules, and those rules are much more beneficial to the people in the nations of Africa. And I'll just say one last word on this.
Sorry, just to summarize that dynamic, the old rules are destabilize and don't allow them to develop. And the new rules is maybe you have China coming in saying, hey, we'll help you build a rail system, or we'll help you develop, and we'll give you these loans and so forth. And so it's stabilizing rather than destabilizing.
Exactly. It's simple. There's a simplicity hovering above the apparent sophistication and complexity of the thing. And if you listen to a lot of analysts yapping on forever about what's going on with the geopolitics of Africa or the BRICS, they make it sound so complicated. And sure, there's a lot of detail, but in reality, there is that simplicity that you just eloquently just said, which is missed in the discussion, which causes people's minds to fail to get to the essential thrust of what is shaping. Like what I said at the very beginning of our discussion today about the collapse of the Western system. The entire Anglo-American banking structure is collapsing. That's setting the global context for everything else and creating a form of timeline around which things have to happen, for good or for bad. Because I got to tell you, if you're in control of the U.S. military arsenal and the banking system that you require to be viable in order to launch wars against nations you don't like, if that banking system collapses, your ability to carry out that type of coordinated action is also going to collapse. And that doesn't really work if you have competent nations, as we see, where there are adults in the room using political power far outside of the NATO transatlantic Five Eyes sphere cage. You actually have competent adults managing, the national economies, the militaries of Eurasia. That doesn't work. You need to be able to do battle with that thing, with that operation, with your banking system kind of intact. So this is one of the interesting things I find fascinating. Is that
and you can't do these infrastructure projects and have them fail, or else no other country will get on board. So there has to be a legitimate win-win for everybody. But isn't it ironic that the Americans themselves have hollowed out their own manufacturing base, and we don't have passenger rail like Europe and other places? It's happening to us too. It's the oligarchs of America. It's not Americans or who are doing this. It's the elites, they call themselves, who are doing this even to our own country.
Yeah, and people, that's the thing, like a lot of people in the world looking towards the United States tend to make the mistake of not differentiating the American people from the U.S. regime that has taken control over the dead body of JFK, Bobby Kennedy, over 60 years ago, as we have talked about, and as viewers of the show would know. But the reality is that the enemies of the Anglo-American deep state operation isn't just other countries that they want to destroy, although it is that too, but it's also the American people themselves that they have to destroy, because the American people carry a heritage, a revolutionary heritage, from 1776 and even before that, to the days of John Winthrop announcing the city on the hill back 150 years before the American Revolution, which called for creating a new type of society founded upon the idea that we have inalienable rights, that all men are created equal, made in the image of God. And the colonists in the Americas, since that moment of the Massachusetts Bay founding, always had that strong independence and hate of the injustice of the other part of the English-speaking world of the British Empire, which never disappeared after 1776, but always worked to destroy and undermine the United States from within. So today, this system has an evil legacy behind it that they've wanted to destroy by declaring war on the American people. But also, if you look at it, every nation has been abused, raped and abused over decades and centuries by this British Empire. India suffered 25 famines under British control of the British Empire. That's unimaginable. How many hundreds of millions of people died by design in India. Same thing for Ireland. Same thing for every country in Africa. The reason why they have the problems, or even the borders that we currently see when we look at a map in Africa, it wasn't African nations deciding on their borders. It was the British, the Belgium, the French, the Dutch, but mostly the British and the Belgians and the French, who went in and artificially at the end of the 19th century just carved out arbitrary lines on a map for geopolitical purposes alone, and usually divided by different tribes that had a grudge with each other in order to create constant divide to conquer civil wars within every country. They did that with Pakistan before Britain left. India, Lord Mountbatten, the controller and handler of the later Prince Philip, and this guy went out of his way to carve out a Muslim region that became Pakistan, and went out of the way to illegally force Muslims who had lived all over India into that controlled zone in order to incubate and cultivate hostility and divide between the Indians and the Pakistanis in constant war forever. They did that with Sudan before the British left Sudan. They did this in Kenya. They did this everywhere. So,
So now I'm seeing the American Civil War as a British operation more clearly, because it is kind of the same idea of divide and conquer. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. I know you probably could talk about that and a lot more, but we are going to get into what happened in Maui. Was it a directed energy weapon? What about these so-called natural disasters? We're going to dig into that, but first I want to talk about Ascent Nutrition. This is a really cool founder. I got to meet him at the GART event in Arizona, and I got to actually sample the products. And I tried about 6 of the products. My favorite, the hemp oil, super potent stuff. If you want to, for me, helped me with my sleep. But this is really, really good stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ascent Nutrition, and we've been talking about them over the previous months, and we'd like to announce that they are offering an even higher discount, 20% off all the products for the month of August, only for Badlanders. And with the fall and winter approaching, their pine needle extract product is expected to sell out, and they wanted to give you all an early chance to buy as we go into the colder months. This is their bestseller and is extracted to be stronger than pine needle tea itself. It is wild harvested, easy to use, and tastes fantastic. I actually can vouch for that. That's one of the products I tested, and I add it to my drinks. It's very sweet. And it's great for detoxification, immune, respiratory, brain, and gut health, and is safe for both kids and adults. If you haven't tried Ascent Nutrition's products yet, and even if you have, now is the time to load up on what they have to offer, whether it be the pine needle extract, their mushrooms, their coffee, or any of their organic products that they offer. Ascent Nutrition personally thanks all the customers that have come in through us here at Badlands and welcomes all those new customers as well. So click on the link in the description and use code BADLANDS20 for 20% off your entire order. Be sure to take advantage of this offer now, as it's specifically for you, our Badlands subscribers, and only for the month of August. So highly, highly recommend the hemp oil as well. That's a really potent, strong product. So that's what sets this apart. It's just the quality is so much better than the average stuff you're going to find out there. Also want to talk about Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance. Are you self-employed and shouldering heavy health insurance costs? The cost of medical insurance can often be like a second mortgage payment. You might be tempted to cut corners, but Obamacare coverage will leave you with unlimited liability in the event of a large claim. And Medi-Share plans are not insurance, and they can leave you responsible for other people's claims. Fortunately, there is a sensible solution. For over 30 years, David Becker of Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance has been helping self-employed individuals save money and get better insurance. If you don't have a PPO, you don't have full protection. Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance specializes in providing top-of-the-line PPO coverage at affordable group rates. If you're paying for your own medical insurance, give David a call, 609-577-8557. There are proven ways to substantially reduce your costs without sacrificing coverage. So call Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance to see if they can help. So where did we leave off? And are you ready to dig into Maui on fire? Or do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about this dynamic between the BRICS and the development and the NATO Five Eyes groups, and how they destabilize and prevent development?
Yeah, I think let's carry that one out a little bit more before rounding about to some of the forms of warfare being conducted on the people of America and more broadly the transatlantic and the world. I think one of the points, it's an irony, Sean, because if we were sober and if we had our wits about us, we would take advantage of, and I'm talking here about the broader we the population, but also policymakers, frankly, and businessmen of the West. But we would take advantage of the model being set for a different type of approach to banking, to finance from the Eurasian economies, by seeing that this is the way we used to do things, like the ability to focus on value, not simply from theories of pricing, theories of interest, the type of crap that the mathematical garbage that they feed kids studying in Harvard or McGill or Yale when they study economics. No. The way we actually built our society was when we had a more clear-headed approach that economics and banking and investments and interest all had to be subservient to an understanding that we have human beings that need certain things satisfied in order to have an economy in the first place. The reason why we have money is because it's arbitrary. It could have been seashells. We all simply agreed to give this legal tender, this piece of paper, a form of value that we attributed. We all agreed that we have trust in this, and that there is something real that will justify the wealth that we accumulate when we have these papers in circulation or whatever. It could have been plastic forks. Doesn't matter. We just all agreed. But we've lost the common sense, basic, elementary. I got a high school textbook on my bookshelf from 1941 in American high schools on geographical economics, and it does go through banking and finance and things like that. But at the first chapter, the first chapter is on what differentiates monkeys from humans and how humans organize agriculture. That's the first friggin' chapter, and simply looking at the days before we had money. We had the need to hunt. We had the need to preserve our meat, the need to create, skins that required certain tanning processes and other things just to stay warm, to use fire. That has value even if there was no money. You have reality. So if you're building dams, if you're doing the things that involve just maintaining electricity access, which we all need in an advanced society where we expect to live to at least 80 years old, honestly, we should expect to live even longer. But you have to be able to both maintain that electricity availability, but not just maintain it through but also improve it. You have to take new technologies that are brought online and infuse it into the productive system in order to make the water availability, the water better quality, the water more available, more useful for farming as well as for residents and for industry, because industry uses a lot of water. So all of these things should be held in consideration. And when you go to take the time to listen to a St. Petersburg economic conference and listen to the economists from China, from Russia, from India, speaking about their understanding of what the economy should be doing, they have a solid grasp of the thing we lost sense of. And so we could take this opportunity of sanity to reevaluate what we did to make us good and do more of that. We could do that.
Right.
You know, Donald
This
Trump,
is a huge opportunity for the United States, and it is something that I think Trump would get on board. Isn't he the businessman who celebrated the ability to do fair trade, real fair trade, not this fake fair trade?
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that. Yes. And I mean that people have been taught to almost like religiously worship this concept of free trade as if it's always good. And sure enough, there are times where free trade is good, no doubt. But for much of human history, including the present, as we alluded to with the IMF conditionalities, free trade kind of works if everybody is honestly playing by the game of competition. If everything is equal, as they say in mathematics, right? All things being equal, and there are no political agencies above nations trying to manipulate the game for their benefit, yes, free trade is fine, which is why it worked with the original 13 colonies that became states after the American War of Independence. At first, under the Articles of Confederation, which existed for about 7 or 8 years until the Constitution was drafted, there was no free trade really amongst the states. Each state had their own protective tariffs, their own issuance of different types of currencies. There was no real solid harmonized nation that could, do a collective tariff. There's no ability to do taxation. There's no ability to build a project that involved the whole nation working together. None of that. So it was a very weak, divided nation, only waiting to be reconquered by the British Empire, with no manufacturing, no industries, no ability to build those industries, and a complete dependence upon cheap labor exports to the British Empire. So they were an economic basket case. The reason why free trade worked is that after 1789, it was recognized that, if we can create a unified nation with a principled constitution, then we can have a protective tariff around all of the states, but within all of the states don't have to fight each other for scraps, but you can actually have free trade amongst each other because you all have the same interest in the same future. So that's good, which is why also in Africa right now, you have what's called the African Free Trade Agreement. That's the first biggest continental free trade agreement, modeled, ironically, on the best examples of the U.S. in those early stages that I described, where now the different African states can trade amongst each other. They are able to build projects like there's 9 major continental rail lines that are on the Africa Agenda 2063 program, which is centered in Ethiopia. It's one of the most solid African countries, despite the problems that they've suffered from foreign manipulation. That's the center of the African Union. So in this project, they have 9 different rail lines that will be driving forces for the development of new industrial zones that will be built up east, west, north, south, that would then connect up into the Belt and Road Initiative from Egypt along the Mediterranean and Suez zone, but also through the Bab el Mandeb Strait, which is this 225 kilometer gap between Djibouti and Yemen. If you look at, if anybody looks at the Arabian map and you look at where the Saudi-Yemeni war has been waged up until very recently, I mean, it was launched in 2015, and we've only now in the last 6 or so months have had a peace deal between the Saudis and the Yemenis. But that gap would be where you would have rail built up and pipelines and other things that would connect to already being projects being built up with the assistance of the Chinese rail corporation engineering firms in the Arabian Peninsula, connecting Oman, Yemen. The UAE is a big player.
So this is exactly what the Anglo-Americans elite don't want. They don't want to connect Africa and the Middle East and all those resources.
No, they don't. No, exactly, because it would make it would be more prosperous if you did that. So it's good business, and any businessman who wants to, or any company that wants to participate in either investing and making that happen, are going to get very good returns. But it will also empower those nations to stand on their own 2 feet, which is really what at the end of the day, it's not about money making the world go round. If you control trillions of dollars of capital flows as a Rothschild banker, you don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I make more money? No, you wake up thinking, how can I maintain the system of controls that keeps my caste of masters? And don't get me wrong, the Rothschild family is upper level management, but they are not masters. But that upper caste that I am in, my upper Brahmins, in a position of power over the multitude who have to be, we expect are born into slave families because there's something lower about the quality of their genetic stock. And so the ways to do that is to keep them dumb, to keep them divided amongst each other, fighting each other for whatever reason, whether for oil, minerals, or religious things, or skin color, or language, whatever. Inflame the differences, make it more difficult for them to see what they have in common, and keep them in a state of scarcity. Because when you're in a state of despair, starving, you're watching your kids starve, guaranteed you're going to be more likely to look for an enemy image that you will want to go and fight to receive your hate and fear and anxiety. So these are just basic things. And also you'll be more superstitious too. You'll be more inclined to believe whatever artificial gods the imperialists want to create for you to worship, which is why even Prince Philip has this sick joke of an African tribe that sees him as a god, and he would visit this African tribe every few decades before he died, and they would worship, sacrifice lambs and stuff to a big picture of Prince Philip from the 1950s that he gave them as their god. And this is like social engineering 101, and a bit of a sick joke for the elites. And I don't like calling them that, but they hate fair trade, and they hate it when nations all start working together, overcoming their religious or ethnic or whatever differences, and start building abundance. They hate that. They try to destroy it when it happened in the United States. That's why they've had their eyes set on destroying the United States for over 250 years. They haven't stopped at any given moment, because the U.S. has this thing within it where, like a phoenix, it tends to rise from the ashes at times where it seems like all odds are against them, which gives me a lot of hope. Looking at American history this way has given me a lot of hope that even despite the fact that the crisis is so dire, that there is something in sort of the genetics, the moral genetics, if you want to call it that, of the U.S., which has, every time it's come close to the abyss, you've had the ability to revive the Constitution.
There's something that has been passed down to me as an American, it's most likely culturally, is this valuing freedom above all other things. And so I do think we have it in us to throw off the yokes of this bondage. I was wondering if you have any insights about Dubai, because we've had these different, global power centers like Hong Kong that are controlled by the Anglo-Americans, and it seems like Dubai is doing something different. And if you could comment on why they've been especially successful.
Well, Dubai in the UAE has a lot of the Arabian sheikdoms have a British imperial heritage. They're Saudi Arabia being one of them, the UAE being another. I mean, there's Oman, there's a few. Many of these families that have been made kings within that region were installed there by British imperialists who wanted their loyal tribe that worked with them, whether during the 19th century or even before that. There was British Afghan wars that involved the use of various Saudis that would be sent in and fund various agencies within Afghanistan or whatever else. Point being is they didn't really play such a very good role in modern geopolitics of the last 80 years. Most of the time, not so good in my analysis. Although there is, like I wrote a book series called The Clash of the Two Americas. You could also have the Clash of the Two Arabias. There is something culturally very powerful that looks back to things like Andalusia, the Islamic Renaissance movements of the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, and even before that. Much of the Western Renaissance was made possible by Western scholars going into the Middle East and studying the manuscripts that were transcribed by the Arabs, who had studied the classics, the Greeks, Homer, Plato, like all of these things were studied by Western scholars, the sciences that had blossomed to create these beautiful architectural designs that you see in southern Spain and in Iraq before NATO destroyed a lot of this when we blew up, the Middle East in the 90s and then after 9/11, or that we sent ISIS to destroy in Syria or Libya. Like every time we destroy a country, we destroy their heritage sites first to destroy the memory of the people, so that they don't have a dignified memory around which to rebuild and reconstruct, and are more
I was
pliable.
wondering why ISIS did that, destroyed the heritage sites.
Yeah, ISIS is an asset of the United States military industrial complex. They carry out what their money bags tell them to do, which is why like ISIS in Mali are being deployed to destroy and attack the military barracks in Niger right now. It's ISIS that's carrying out those attacks. Like, why would ISIS, these Arab, African, in this case, African freedom fighters, as they call themselves, want to destroy a new government that just liberated itself from Western colonialism? It's because they're assets of the CIA. That's how we destroyed Libya, Gaddafi, and everything else. And then we killed again. We destroyed their museums, all these things. So in the case of UAE, I've been very impressed in the last 4 years or so. They've gone from being just sort of a financial hub where there's been money laundering, tourism for billionaires, things like that, to becoming a driving force of scientific progress in a move towards embracing a that Belt and Road Initiative orientation. So they're the first country of Arabia with a nuclear sector. They recognize that oil geopolitics is a thing of the past, even though their whole economy has been built upon oil geopolitics. They had no industry, they had no factories. Same thing for Saudi Arabia. They were told by their masters in London, you'll make money off of oil. You don't need to have manufacturing and industries and processing facilities to turn the oil into something useful. You don't need to have science and technology because you have oil. That makes your people rich, or at least your elites rich, because there's a lot of poverty. So, it seems to be a revolution in like a battle against some of the deep state operatives within both countries. And what came out of that fight, starting in, as far as I could see it, around 2017 in both countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia, was a totally different policy. Saudi Arabia adopted the Saudi 2030 Vision program that is very much more tied to high-speed rail development, manufacturing hubs, building up upstream, downstream facilities for the raw materials, and also a foreign policy that would be based around like healing, going towards Yemen and saying, let's build a peace process, going towards Iran, which had no diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia since 2016. And the murder of Imam Imr al-Nimr, which is an Iranian imam in Saudi Arabia, brutally murdered, and that killed all diplomatic relations. Well, now you have a rebuilding because China and Russia have facilitated these back-channel discussions for entente and cooperation. So also, UAE is one of the most robust space programs of the Middle East. With a program to land a rover on Mars. They already have an orbiter around Mars. Very, very good stuff. And the head of their space program is this young girl who's like 23 years old. I've listened to her speeches. My wife's written about her. She's brilliant, brilliant. And so we're told, oh, these are like nations who are just anti-woman. And yeah, they do have misogynist problems. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Saudi Arabia, the women were just allowed to drive cars like last year or something. So there's problems. I'm not trying to say it's all good, but hello.
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
I'm back. Okay. I don't know if that was my side or your side. Yeah. So yeah, all that to say, yeah, UAE, Dubai, it seems like they're getting their heads out of their asses and looking towards the real economy in the future in a fair trade orientation. And as you pointed out, free trade, fair trade, not the same thing. Trading fairly is like every nation should be able to produce for itself. And the idea is we should all have access to use the resources, the land, the resources, whatever we're endowed with, because not all nations are equal. But we should be able to have the manufacturing, the transformative power of factories to make the lumber, whatever, into useful goods, and in order to satisfy the needs of our people as best as possible, That's called full spectrum economics, right? You have food production, you have industrial production, and then whatever bounty in excess we produce that we don't need for ourselves, we will trade internationally on a fair trade basis, and you will pay for the goods that you import and buy from other countries fairly, the way you would pay local workers and your own people. You won't be trying to exploit them because they're poor. And obviously, if people in another country can be made to stay poor and use obsolete technology for whether for cash cropping or for filling our dollar stores, yeah, you won't have to pay them. You might have to pay them $1 a day, like we do for many Africans who make who mine cobalt for our cell phones. But if they were developed and living on parity in a similar living standard as we are, no, you'd have to pay them a just honorable wage as you would pay a Canadian or an American miner. And I don't mean underage workers here, which is another problem for Africa when I say miner. So that's fair trade. Fair trade is just common sense. It's good stuff. And it is compatible with different types of selective protectionism as well as selective free trade. But it's based on a moral principle. And that's what we used to have and we've forgotten.
Yeah, that's what I'm always surprised that I learn from you. It's not just learning about history, because you have such a great knowledge of all the facts and figures and dates and people, but you're teaching me about the very fundamental concepts of what makes a civilization and makes a functional society and a functional economy. And none of those things that you mentioned about a functional economy had anything to do with speculation, which is what we've been desensitized to, that being normal, that you just gamble with all of these things that have to do with the real economy. I know you have a response to that, but I'm going to talk briefly about bootleg products. This is some really good stuff. My mom loved these products. They sent the samples to her in Pennsylvania, and she just thought the salsa was really tasty. And they sent one thing that was super hot, so you got to choose your level of spiciness that you want. But the Bootleg Products, it's a family-owned and run business on a mission to bring the heart and soul of America right to your dinner table. You can indulge in their mouth-watering homemade chili, zesty salsa, tantalizing salad dressings that will make your taste buds sing. Bootleg Products takes pride in their premium seasonings crafted with care to infuse every dish with pure American goodness. Your favorite recipes will never be the same again. And here's what warms the heart. When you choose Bootleg, you're supporting an America First business that cares about local communities and cherishes the true spirit of the American dream. So go over to bootlegproducts.com, explore a treasure trove of flavor, and use promo code BADLANDS to receive a free bottle of Iowa Flavor Enhancer. That's promo code BADLANDS. And now we're going to talk about Flying Gang Rum. This is another America First company making artisanal rum here. So Patriot owned, woman owned, true reflection of America tenacity and spirit. What sets this rum apart? Meticulously produced from pure Florida sugarcane, aged to perfection in ex-bourbon barrels, and then select cask finished. A rum so pure, it comes with no added sugar, colors, or artificial flavorings. That's right, just pure rum. It's not just any rum. It's Flying Gang Rum is on a mission to change how we perceive sipping rum. To Florida, it's what wine is to Napa, bourbon to Kentucky, and whiskey to Tennessee. This iconic rum is all about elevating the connoisseur's experience, capturing the rich history and unique character of handcrafted rum. So you can go to flyinggang.com/shop rum. Use promo code BADLANDS for free shipping over $100. We have 14 minutes left, Matt. I want to make sure we talk about what happened in Maui and how you perceived that as the facts were coming in, the photos were coming in. How did you interpret this type of second worst, possibly the worst fire in American history?
Yeah, it is a real sick tragedy. And I had written an essay not that long ago on eco-terrorism and the emergence of the above grounders and below grounders, as was put forth on the Deep Green Resistance website. It's an eco-terrorist program that has been recruiting young radicalized students from the wokest university structures and coordinating assaults on infrastructure, rail lines, power stations, on the list of their trophy list that they host on their website of different hundreds of different points of infrastructure that have been targeted for destruction. I didn't see any fires burning down, but looking at the anomalous way that fires were springing up this year, especially where I began to pay closer attention, as did many people in Canada, especially. There were all sorts of anomalies. So I was already thinking in terms of arson. Same thing for Greece. In some cases, there's even drone footage of human beings going around with their motorcycles, throwing Molotov cocktails into the forest and just driving. None of this is discussed. All of this is being sold to us as man-made climate change and a reason why we need to shut down carbon production in industry. But it all smelled of coordinated arson. So that's where my mind originally went. And again, I don't have any smoking guns per se, but increasingly, evidence and information has popped up that has captured my eye in the past couple of weeks over directed energy weapons, which I wasn't even thinking about. But I got to say, there's a lot of information out there demonstrating that Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, other private contractors like the UK's Ministry of Defense has hired out different contractors over decades to build up directed energy beams that could either be mounted on planes or on satellites. And you see some of the footage that people have taken from various parts of the world that's been going viral online, and I'm quite persuaded that this has to be really looked into much more seriously. The U.S. Air Force has a directed energy beam operation that has been in place at least openly since 2016, which is a very influential thing. When you look at the destruction of selected houses in neighborhoods in Lahaina, in Maui, and you look at the way that the fires behaved by destroying the houses completely, you can't even recognize that there was a house there. It's just these big black squares on the ground, flattened, separated by trees that are somehow still standing. And whole neighborhoods have gone down like this, with neighborhoods separated by whole tree systems with other neighborhoods close by that also got hammered by fire. And yet in many cases, you have these anomalies where the trees between the two neighborhoods were not hit. So there's weird stuff like that, right? That does cause the mind to ponder what the hell is going on. And then you have things like the Governor Green of Hawaii coming out making strange announcements that the land is now open for being reclaimed, that he has an intention to take the land into state control. This is some of the most valuable real estate. People like Oprah Winfrey somehow bought like 800 acres of this high quality land early on and made creepy statements like, we are going to rebuild in ways you haven't even imagined, knowing, of course, that the idea of creating the precedence of 15-minute cities that could then be rebuilt in a very organized way from scratch around the Agenda 2030 program, which itself calls for, and this has been normalized in the international legal structures around the United Nations in the recent years, the idea that land can be reclaimed by the state if there is a crisis, whether chemical spillage of a train in, let's say, a farm-dense region of Ohio, or the cases in the Yukon or Northwest Territories today, or British Columbia, where there have been strange anomalous fires going off in ways that we haven't seen in previous years as precedent, which under the new legal structures, some can say could be reclaimed by the state, and people who had former property rights there no longer have those rights. They have to be moved to more safe locations. So that's something which, in my mind, mixed with the other form of warfare on the people of America in the form of pathogens, reminded me again of the Project for New American Century. And I really think that this can't be reemphasized enough. People should read. Before 9/11, right, you had Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Victoria Nuland's husband, Robert Kagan. They drafted something called the Project for a New American Century, which was a think tank where the incoming neocon administration set about the creation of a unipolar system of controls under a one world government, where sovereign nation states won't exist. Russia, China, Iran were seen as the only real threats to this New World Order architecture. These were all creatures who were part of the Zbigniew-Brzezinski Trilateral Commission operation of the 1970s that took control of the U.S. foreign policy. And in it, they literally said in September 2000, the Rebuilding American Defenses white paper can be read online, where they said combat in the 21st century will likely take place in new dimensions, in space, cyberspace, and perhaps the world of microbes. Advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. So we're talking about space warfare, cyberspace warfare, communications, internet warfare. I think the entire social media platform, which came out of the military-industrial complex in DARPA, that's Facebook for you. That's Twitter. All of this
LifeLog.
Huh? What's that?
LifeLog.
All of this, it came out of anthropologists and social psychiatrists working for the U.S. military-industrial complex and the CIA in the 1970s, looking at mapping out human networks in Africa and other places and seeing how can you use a networking system where we profile ourselves, and then you can nudge and figure out how to psychologically profile and then manipulate whole networks of people who have like minds within the social media universe in that space. So you have that. It's also useful for overthrowing governments you don't like. That's how the Iran Green Revolution was organized, or the riots in 2009 in China that killed 2,000 people.
Or to stop revolutions from occurring, you just shut down the social media platforms, and then they can't do it. So it goes both ways. But yeah, LifeLog, I learned this from the Q post, that LifeLog was a DARPA project very similar to Facebook. They shut it down the day before Facebook was founded or launched.
That's interesting, eh? That's so interesting. The whole thing. And then they create some synthetic cardboard cutout like a Mark Zuckerberg to be the genius that we see as on the surface. And it's like, no, in no case, whether it's Zuckerberg or Bezos or Musk, in my view, none of the Bill Gates, none of these are authentically emerging geniuses from garages or something. None of them. They're all cardboard cutouts with family connections tied to the upper echelons of the military-industrial complex that serve a use to hide the fact that it's the same agencies that brought us Hitler, IBM, which was organizing all of the death camps, right? That's what was overseeing the creation of this desktop computing system to bring their technology into our houses. And they had to do a little cardboard cutout of the son that used the sons of one of the directors at IBM, Bill Gates, as a cover story to rebrand themselves, because people won't trust IBM. They still had a very nasty, smelly reputation of working with Nazis, even in the 60s and 70s. So they had to rebrand and do something a little bit different. Same thing for Musk, with his technocracy party grandfather, who managed the technocracy party of Canada. All of this stuff. So the thing is, we have to look at the fact that these agencies, like I said, Richard Pearl, Kagan, all these characters who have merged with, like, we once had authentic Republicans and authentic Democrats, like Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, who were very much cut from the same cloth. This is what Donald Trump was and is bringing back into play, is the authentic American patriots from both aisles who recognize that their parties are captured. Bobby Kennedy, I think, to a certain degree, is playing a positive role in that too, and they could have a better convergence. But you have a convergence of the evil guys too, right? The Clintonite, Obama, Soros Democrats, and the right-wing neocon conservatives are also all converged now on the same view that we have to go to war with Russia, go to war with China, declare war in the United States, and weaponize.
That's so important, Matt, that you mentioned that. It's something that you can't gloss over. That the worst of both parties both agree to go to war with Russia and China. That's what they want next. That's what these psychological operations that we think are our daily news, or we think are hot takes from our favorite commentators, are all to get us geared up for the next world war. And we've seen this how many times before with world wars, controlled by families that profit off of it and then divide up the spoils. So I really think that's the big picture thing that we all have to keep in mind, because the beginning of this show was about Russia and China forming a competitor to the Anglo-American control center of everything. And so, of course, they're going to be demonized and made out to be the enemy, and that we need to go to war with them, right? I mean, we've got 3 minutes left. Can you give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's really it, and Jake Sullivan gave an interview in 2019 this Rhodes Scholar freak, Brookings Institute operative who's been handling Obama and Biden, and he's there again as special advisor. And anyway, this guy in this interview basically said it's a win-win. We have to figure out a way to make China an enemy image that would rally the people of America the way Pearl Harbor did rally them back in 1941. And he goes on at length talking about how the Cold War had a proper enemy image around which we could unify the masses of Americans. And today it's not tightened enough, that the enemy image, because honestly, you can organize people around hope or fear. Oligarchs will always organize us and get us to work together in fear of some other constructed enemy image. A real leader like a Martin Luther King or a John F. Kennedy will challenge us to hope with reason, not the Obama hope. I'm talking about reasonable, viable hope, because it's hope that we all have to participate in making happen. We have to take responsibility. As JFK said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So that is a real type of expectation of citizens acting like citizens, taking responsibility onto themselves for their future and thus earning their rights. Rights are not just whatever I want to do at this given.
But aren't we in a generational crisis here where millennials don't feel hope? They don't think they're going to earn more than their parents earned. They can't afford the things that their parents could afford as far as getting their own home, owning property. Millennials, younger than millennials, the generations under them, less and less hope, more and more live for the moment, YOLO, you only live once, gamble all the little that you have for short-term gratification. Can you comment on that demographic crisis that we're in right now, where there's just not enough economic hope for people to construct an image of the future that they like and want?
Yes. Yeah. It's I think we have one last chance to basically turn things around, because the next generation of millennials and younger don't have a lot of access and reference points, especially young people born after 9/11 that don't even have a memory of a pre-9/11 world as a reference point. They live in a very detached world that has reality and fiction completely blurry, with a lot of very bad influences, and there's very few who have parental structures that have been able to give them the type of training that they need to have to become the citizens. So that worries me a lot, which is why, again, this window of opportunity that to bring back the constitutional banking structures, work with Russia, China, India, other countries around the BRICS that are going to it will happen. There will be an emergency conference for a new economic architecture, probably two, actually, because you have the death cult Davos clan they're already planning their own, and it's going to be based upon everything we know about a depopulation agenda, digital currencies, 15-minute slave cities, all that stuff, eating bugs. And then you have the abundance creation dynamic, which is winning more and more people of the world to their movement, which is going to have their own conference. They're already setting the groundwork for it. We are invited to join and participate as active participants and members.
Isn't that a beautiful thing? It's not, they don't have to paint someone as the enemy who gets excluded. They're inviting people to cooperate. So it's really control versus cooperation as an archetype. But that's the concept of my new show on Badlands. So it's a nice segue. On Thursdays, no longer doing Economic Update with Dr. Kirk Elliott. I'm hosting a show with rotating financial guests to talk about those two very different visions for our financial future. So check that out on Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. So Matt, thank you for joining today. We're going to do another episode next week. Thank you for bringing your insights into what's happening now, because what's happening in Maui right now, we can learn about it from the past, and we can look forward and plan for it. So thank you, Matt, and we'll see you next time, everybody.
Take care.